Erev Tov Rabotai, we are continuing with our Mishna Yomi, Masechet Pesachim. We are up to Perik Gimel, Mishnah Bet. Today's Mishnayot should be Leilu Nishmat, Neria ben Svetlana, Aranbayev, Neriyahu ben Burcha Israelov, Menuchatam Began Eden, Amen. The following Mishnah discusses when chametz dough attached to a utensil needs to be disposed of before Pesach. Batzek shebesidkei areva, the dough that is found in the cracks of a kneading trough, which is a bowl in which flour and water are mixed together and kneaded into dough. Now, the dough that is found in the cracks, which is left in a place to seal the cracks, we treat it as follows. Im yesh kazait b'makom echad, if there is a kazait, an olive's volume of dough in one place, chayav leva'er, the owner is obligated to dispose of it, to destroy it, since it's not considered to be part of the trough. Meaning, such a piece is too large to become nullified for Pesach and be considered part of the trough, even though it is being used to seal it. Therefore, it is still considered chametz and must be removed and disposed of before Pesach. Vimlo, but if there is no olive's volume in one place, batel b'miuto, it is nullified due to its smallness, meaning the dough is considered a part of the kneading trough and not a food, and therefore it does not need to be removed and disposed of before Pesach. Now, this is true even if all the small pieces together total a kazayit, as long as each piece by itself is less than a kazayit and is being used to seal a crack, it is considered part of that bowl. However, if the pieces of dough were not left there to seal the cracks of the bowl, even less than a kazayit must be removed, the Rav explains, because we cannot view these pieces as being part of the utensil, since they are not meant to remain there permanently. The Mishnah says, and so too in regard to the laws of Tumah, meaning the commentaries explain, if a source of impurity touches the dough in the crack, but not the bowl itself on Pesach, the law is as follows. If that piece of dough is the size of a kazayit, the size of an olive, since it's not considered part of the bowl in regard to the laws of Pesach, it is also not considered part of the bowl in regard to Tumah. Now, since the laws of Pesach require that the dough be removed, it cannot be considered part of the bowl on Pesach, and therefore it is considered a food which becomes tameh in its own right. Therefore, the dough itself becomes tameh, but the bowl does not, because since foods cannot transmit tumah to utensils, the utensil, in this case, the bowl, will not become tameh. However, if the dough that was touched is less than the size of an olive, it is considered part of the bowl. Therefore, it is as if the source of tumah touched the bowl itself, and the entire bowl is tameh. Because the commentators explain, when tumah touches part of a utensil, the entire utensil becomes impure. Therefore, if this little bit of dough is considered part of the bowl, the tumah that touches it makes the entire bowl tameh. However, even this small amount of dough is considered part of the bowl only if the owner plans to leave it there permanently. Now, this is the law for the tumah of the kneading bowl on Pesach. During the rest of the year, the size of the dough is irrelevant. Rather, it depends on the intention of the owner. If he is particular about it, meaning he does not want to leave the dough in the crack and is planning to remove it, the dough is not considered part of the bowl, and it therefore serves as a barrier to the tumah. Since the dough is not considered part of the bowl, it becomes tameh on its own as a food, and a food cannot transmit tumah to utensil, like we learned earlier. Therefore, it prevents the bowl from becoming tameh, since the tumah did not touch the bowl itself, but the dough stuck to it. But if he wants it to remain there, the dough is considered part of the bowl, and therefore when the tumah touches the dough, it makes the entire bowl become tameh. Now, the year-round law applies on Pesach as well. Any piece that the owner intends to remove, even less than a kazayit, is not considered part of the bowl and becomes tameh on its own. The only difference between Pesach and the rest of the year is in regard to a piece the size of a kazayit. A piece of dough this size must be removed on Pesach, even if the owner would like to keep it there. So for this reason, it's never considered part of the bowl on Pesach. Now, the last part of the Mishnah deals with the law of silent dough, literally deaf dough, as the Rav will tell us. Usually, one can bang on a dough and hear a thump, which indicates that the dough has leavened in its chametz. The dough the Mishnah now discusses had been left for some time, but does not produce any sound. Therefore, we are not sure whether it's actually chametz and just an abnormal kind of dough, or whether the dough is not yet chametz. Batseka cheresh, silent dough, deaf dough, the law is as follows. If there exists a similar dough, meaning another dough needed at the same time, and we can see that it became chametz, then the silent dough is also forbidden, since we assume that it too became chametz. Now, if there was no other dough made at that time, the commentary is right, we assume that the dough in question is chametz, as long as it has been left unattended for the amount of time it takes to walk a mill, 2,000 amot. Now, this figure is given as 18 minutes according to most authorities. As Maran writes in Or Chaim, chapter 459, Halakha 2, with Mishnah Bua Sif Katan 15. And that is the end of Mishnah Bet. Mishnah Gimel now discusses separating challah on the Yom Tov of Pesach from dough that is tameh. Now, when making dough, the Torah requires that a portion of it be separated and given to a Kohen. In Sefer Bamidbar, chapter 15, Psukim 17 through 21. This portion is known as challah. It is treated like tiruma, and it may be eaten only by a Kohen and only if it is ta'or, as we will see B'lineda B'ezrat Hashem in Masechet Challah Mishnayot, chapter 1, Mishnah 9. If the challah is tameh, it must be burned, but it may be used by the Kohen to fuel his fire, as the Rambam says in Ilchot Bikurim, chapter 5, Halakha 4. Ketzad mafrishin challah betuma b'yom tov. How do we separate challah from dough that is in a state of tumah on the Yom Tov of Pesach, meaning on the first or last day of the holiday, in contrast to Chol HaMoed? Now, it cannot be left as dough, since it will become chametz. It cannot be baked, since we may bake on Yom Tov only things that will be eaten that day, and challah that is tameh cannot be eaten even by a Kohen. It cannot be burned even as fuel, because it is forbidden to burn tiruma and challah on Yom Tov due to the law of En Sofin Kodashim B'Yom Tov. We do not burn or destroy holy objects on Yom Tov, so for this reason it can also not be fed to a dog. How then, the commentary is right, should someone making a tameh dough on Yom Tov deal with this obligation to separate challah from it? Now, it's permitted to eat bread or matzah that is tameh, since it is not holy. It is only challah, which is holy and can be eaten only by Kohanim, that may not be eaten when it's tameh. The Mishnah now cites three opinions. Rabbi Eliezer says, Lo tikra la shem ad shete'afeh. The woman making the dough should not designate a portion of it as challah until it's baked, meaning she should not separate challah from the dough. Rather, she should make loaves from the dough, bake them into matzah, and then designate one of the matzot as challah. Now, although challah should be separated from the dough, if it was not, it is separated from the baked product, as the Rambam writes in Chod Bikurim, chapter 8, Halakha 3. So here, where there's no choice, Rabbi Eliezer recommends baking it first and then separating the challah afterward. Even though one may not bake a loaf of tameh dough that was designated as challah, one may bake all the loaves first and then designate the loaf of challah afterwards. The reason for this is that at the time they are baked, each loaf can technically be eaten, since a person may separate a small piece from each loaf as challah. Therefore, there's no violation of Yom Tov by baking all the loaves, even if one ultimately decides to separate a whole loaf as challah. Rabbi Yehuda ben Betera says, Tatil batzonen. She should separate the challah from the dough and put it into cold water to prevent it from becoming chametz, because the Meiri writes cold water prevents a dough from leavening. Now, Rabbi Yehuda ben Betera rejects Rabbi Eliezer's solution, because in his opinion, the matzah that will eventually be designated as challah should not be baked, since it will not be eaten. Now, according to Rabbi Yehuda ben Betera, separate the challah, put it into cold water. It can then be saved until nightfall and be burned after Yom Tov. Amar Rabbi Yeshua said, Lo zehu chametz shemusarim alav bebal yireh ubal yimatzeh. This piece of challah, even if it became chametz, is not in the category of chametz, about what the pasuk says, it shall not be seen or shall not be found. Ela mafrashta umanachta ad ha'erev v'imechemitzah chemitzah. Rather, she separates it from the dough, leaves it until the evening. If it becomes chametz, meaning there's no concern, since she does not own it. Which the commentators explain, according to Rabbi Yeshua, these biblical prohibitions are violated only when one owns the chametz in his possession. We learn from the pasuk, no chametz shall be seen in your possession, as the Torah says in Sefer Shemot, chapter 13, pasuk 7. Once a person designates dough as challah, it no longer belongs to him but to the family of the Kohanim. The Rav says it also doesn't belong to any specific Kohen until it's given to him. Therefore, the Kohanim too are not violating these prohibitions. Therefore, one may separate dough for challah and leave it to become chametz. Now, Rabbi Eliezer did not give the solution because he considers the challah to be the property of the one who separated it until it's given to a kohen. The Rav does tell us, "V'anachak Rabbi Eliezer." The halacha follows the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer. That is the Rabotai of today's Mishna Yomi. Baruch Adonai Leolam. Amen v'amen.